Hello Europeans! Missed us yet? We are delighted to be back with the second episode of How to Say Cheers in Esperanto. For the noobs out there listening to us for the first time today, this is a radio and video podcast during which we discuss the news of the European Union. We are an independent team of reporters in no way affiliated to the EU. My name is Liam Ó'Ruairc, I'm from Paris, and as usual, sitting next to me, warming his smooth voice, my sidekick, Berlin-born Paul Fabel. Take it away, mate.
Hey, what's up, Europe? Ready for a second date?
Oh, you player.
Jokes aside, we are really happy to be back for this new episode. A lot has happened in the EU since we've last spoken. Elections, deceptions, decisions.
Demonstrations, revolutions, transformations.
We cannot talk about everything, so we have picked, as usual, 4 topics that we will develop for you and try to clarify for those of you who might be confused.
Winkers.
Shut up, Guillaume. It's time to launch the jingle.
Oh, please no.
Cheers in Esperanto. Does anybody know how to say cheers in Esperanto? Good lord.
This is the worst thing we've ever produced.
Come on, man, cheer up.
That second episode is starting so badly.
Look, dude, pull yourself together and tell us about today's program.
Alright, Europeans. Let's begin with Brexit. June 23 was the first anniversary of the day our British friends foolishly decided to jump off the cliff and to leave the EU. After 1 year, what has changed beyond the Channel Sea? The UK is still officially a part of the EU, but our investigation shows that some dreadful consequences can already be felt. And do not miss our interview with Liam Ó'Ruairc, a former Northern Irish Republican activist, now an expert of the peace treaty in Ireland, with whom we will talk about the future of Ireland in the EU.
Good news, Europeans. Europe has become somewhat more democratic. We will present you 2 announcements from the European Court of Justice that directly affect the way that the Euro Commission has to behave in regards to international free trade agreements. They are related to the content, the ratification, and, most interestingly, to the role of civil society too. It is us. In this segment, thus, you will find out how citizens' concerns in that field of policy can and must always be heard.
Shep Munka to the Hungarian people. After months of sometimes violent demonstrations opposing many citizens of Hungary to the authority, the protesters have won a great victory against Viktor Orbán, their overly conservative prime minister. The protectionist and Eurosceptic head of the country had tried to close the University of Central Europe, financed by American-Hungarian businessman George Soros. We had the chance to talk to Daniel Deak, a professor at the University of Corvinus. We've discussed the antagonism currently dividing Hungary between the nationalist conservatives and the pro-European youth.
And finally, the moment you've all been looking forward to, the moment we shout, Europe, get your together. Because roaming, or how Erasmus students call it, the less expensive dick pic sharing means, isn't so terribly cheap after all. We have all been tricked a bit by our phone providers and the Commission. Since June 15th, roaming fees are no longer a thing. No longer a thing? Well, not really, eh? We'll tell you everything you need to know in about a few minutes.
The British are leaving. Yeah, this is it, fellas. Theresa May has managed to create a coalition government thanks to a 1.5 billion quids deal with Northern Ireland's DUP, the political party in favour of a continuous attachment between Belfast and London. This means, well, that the negotiations between the UK and the EU are about to begin.
I do not love Brussels, I love Britain. I'm the first to say that there are still many ways in which Europe needs to improve, and that the task of reforming Europe does not end with yesterday's agreement. And I will never say that our country couldn't survive outside Europe. We are Great Britain. We can achieve great things.
It was a bit over a year ago on June 23, 2016 to be precise, that the British have voted to leave on the Brexit referendum.
First, Brexit means Brexit.
A year that had seen great division among the subjects of Her Majesty, and the first dreadful consequences of the vote. The very following day, the London stock market had seen a 7% drop of the pound. As a first warning, after 1 year, the British currency, that used to be worth twice $1, has dropped to $1.3. Bloody awesome for American tourists for sure, but a rather bad news for the inhabitants of the island, for the country imports up to 30% of its GDP, which led to significant inflation. Direct and real estate investments were also impacted, with a 15% impairment loss.
Okay, mate, you're boring everyone with your math. Britain's economy got hit pretty hard, we got it. But what about public authorities? What can you tell us about the electoral consequences of Brexit?
Awesome question, Paul. Thank you for the kind condescendence, by the way.
You're welcome.
Right, you're actually not wrong. The past year has been an electoral mess. First, in Northern Ireland, where regional elections were held on March 3rd. As usual, we've seen the DUP, the party that means to keep Belfast and London together, win the majority of the seats in the Northern Irish Parliament, but the separatists of the Sinn Féin, that want Northern Ireland to be reunified with the Republic of Ireland, scored pretty impressive results as well.
Are you saying Northern Ireland is going to secede from the rest of the UK?
Actually, I'd love to tell you this, that'd be wickedly interesting, but that tendency was not confirmed during the snap elections of June. The DUP got most of the Northern Irish seats in Westminster. Actually, this is probably the result of the election that best showed the division of the British people. Theresa May, who had wanted these elections to take place, lost a supermajority in the operation.
Terrible calculation, eh? So, who won?
Nobody bloody won. The Tories lost their supermajority. The Labours just managed to reach the second place. Nicola Sturgeon's Scottish National Party only got 35 seats, which is probably too little for Scotland to organise a new referendum on its independence. Everyone lost, to say the least. Theresa May kept her position as the Prime Minister, but she now has to compose with a terribly divided Parliament, and she's going to be in charge of negotiating Brexit. So not only May is going to be facing some tough resistance from Francis Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, but she's also going to need the approval of Westminster every step of the way, meaning the consent of Jeremy Corbyn Labour, thoroughly opposed to the Tories' conservative policies, on top of the reluctance of the Scottish nationalists.
I almost feel bad for her.
Well, let's remain neutral on the matter. She's been knocking on every door to create a government of coalition, and she's eventually managed to find an agreement with the DUP. But this is quite a marginal association, and it pisses off quite a few people in Britain, but mostly among the Northern Irish citizens. Wait, citizens? Am I even allowed to call them that?
There's no such thing as a British citizen. What you have is actually British subjects. Citizens is something that only exists in a republic where, political power is held by the people, for the people, and in the interest of the people. Whereas in a monarchy, the ultimate sovereign is not the people, but the monarch who monopolizes political power. So basically, you're not a citizen, you're subject to a monarch who by birth has the right to rule over you.
This is Liam Ó'Ruairc, a former Republican activist from Belfast. Now retired from politics, he's become a respected expert of the 1998 peace treaty in Northern Ireland and of the border between the UK and the Republic of Ireland. We met Liam in Paris at the Galway Irish pub around a fair pint of ale. Liam, the Northern Irish widely voted for the DUP, the party that wants Belfast to remain part of the UK during the last general elections. That's a step further from the reunification of both islands. How do you explain this?
The vast majority are in favour of remaining within the United Kingdom. I think you have to look at this in kind of objective terms. For instance, what are the actual terms of trade relations between the 6 counties in North of Ireland and 26 counties of Ireland, or between, the trade relations between the 6 counties of Northern Ireland and the mainland UK. The fact is that the European Union and 26 counties south of the border are a very marginal economic partner of the 6 counties. What it depends most on is not Brussels money, it's not Dublin economic investments, it's actually financial transfers from the London government to Northern Ireland. Now, every person in Northern Ireland is funded on the tune of £5,000 a year. Every year, the government London government spends for each person living in Northern Ireland £5,000. So really, London is a master player. If it loses Dublin or if it loses Brussels, it doesn't really matter. What matters is getting, the London connection.
Right, London's got the money, and we can understand that it feels somehow safer to remain part of the UK. But isn't Brexit a threat to peace in Ireland? Isn't it going to make it even harder for the Irish people to cross the border?
With Brexit, there are entire elements of the 1998 Belfast Agreement which are now being relinquished, like, adopting European human rights legislation. That is now, which is a so-called gain for Sinn Féin now. That is out the window. That's one thing. The second thing as well is that the border which exists between the 26 counties of Ireland and the 6 counties of Northern Ireland are no longer just going to be a border between the 26 county states and the British states. It's going to be an international frontier between the European Union and what's outside of the European. So this really strengthens the kind of border. And I think that for that, Brexit is a good injection of reality, because for the last almost 20 years, the dominant discourse was, but this border, it's irrelevant, the European Union is dissolving it and so on. But that's not true. Actually, the border now is stronger than it has ever been since 1921.
What is your opinion on Brexit? Not just for Belfast, but for the UK altogether?
In the context of the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, I think Brexit is a disaster for at least 3 reasons. The first reason is that all the human rights legislation which came through the 1998 Belfast Agreement now is being put into jeopardy. That's the first reason. Second reason, in terms of economic fundings, say for community groups, for farmers and so on, this is all going away. And thirdly, it's going just to reinforce the border. I mean, partition is going to be much more of a problem now than it has been, for a long time. I think Brexit is an overall disaster. It's basically the triumph for the most reactionary forces within English nationalism. I think that what's the only so-called positive thing I can say about Brexit is that it proves that there's such a thing as English nationalism. Prior to the Brexit, not many people would have been aware, or they thought that Britain was more or less neutral on the constitutional question, or it was kind of normal European state. But this shows really that there are reactionary forces which are dominant there. It's not a progressive step; it's a regressive step that is moving towards a more narrow type of nationalism.
Thank you, Liam, for answering our questions. Europeans, you can stream the uncut video interview of Liam Ó'Ruairc on our website www.cheersinesperanto.eu. We've also posted some links to its website on which you can buy Liam's books in French or in English on the history and policies of Northern Ireland. We can't predict what will happen to the borders, neither what will happen with the single market. Deals between the EU and overseas countries were made before, after all, like the TTIP, our next topic.
Now, it's the economy, stupid. We wanted to tackle the never-ending story of EU trade agreements. There are several, as we know. The most famous ones, TTIP and CETA, have caused millions of people a headache, and the EU Commission for sure as well. And there are a few new developments we wanted to tell you, beautiful listeners, about.
But Paul, the preliminary info please. Not everyone understands EU trade policy.
Sure, Guy. Although I am sure many who negotiate in the talks don't either. Free trade agreements is something that you can, let's say, compare to your shared flat, your student accommodation. Everyone has his or her own room with own rules and wants privacy. At the same time, you might want to buy or borrow a corkscrew while you have to give away yesterday's groceries since you leave for the weekend, let's say. Trading and selling those freely with your roommates without having to register what leaves and enters the room without paying in your shared shopping jar in the kitchen. That's the basic idea of a free trade agreement. Charges at borders are minimized as much as possible. That helps economically, but can also threaten smaller or vulnerable markets, or at least parts of it. The single market of the EU is one kind of a free trade zone, and the EU conducts with international partners and other states talks to broaden this free trade zone. The area where it does not have to pay tariffs or taxes on cross-border transactions.
Alright, sounds like one big selling orgy if you ask me. Nice flight you guys have. So what's the news?
2 major decisions are the news. 2 major decisions have been taken in recent days that sparked our attention. One on TTIP and one on trade agreements in general. Plus, it so happens to be that there is even some more up-to-date info regarding yet another free trade agreement, one with Japan. So, 3 issues at hand really.
Okay, what's the first one for instance?
As you know, there was always skepticism among many citizens. People gathered signatures to tell the Commission to back off from some provisions in the free trade agreement. Several million signatures were gathered, and to make that call more official, the activists wanted the Commission to register them as a citizens' initiative, or CI. CIs can be called to life, provided they fulfill some specific quotas regarding representation of people in the EU, in order to influence a legal act on EU level. The Commission declined the request and said it is only negotiating with the United States, thus not really working on a legal act. Well, tough luck, Juncker. The General Court decided on May 10th of this year that the Commission's decision to be annulled and the CI upheld, meaning that the CI can be registered and must be registered. The court said the principle of democracy requires an interpretation of the concept of legal act which covers such legal acts like opening negotiations. A citizens' initiative might aim at withdrawals of decisions or preventing of signing an act in the long run, so it is perfectly fine to call for such a registration of an CI. Furthermore, CIs aim at letting citizens participate even more actively. Thus, the fact that a procedure is ongoing, another claim from the Commission, is not a reason to not registering one.
That's great news, right?
For now, yes, it is for sure fortifying democratic rights, and the Commission has 2 months to contest. And from a short Twitter exchange with German member of Berlin's regional parliament, Michael Effler, who so happens to be also the principal claimant at the General Court from the CI's side, the Commission is not planning on contesting that decision.
Well, that's reassuring. Now what's next?
What's next is, we also want to use that opportunity to show you a bit about another EU institution. It's the European Court of Justice, or ECJ. We will not be able to tell you a whole lot about it, unfortunately, like we did in the last episode on the Ombudsman, since we simply have a different focus this time. Nonetheless, the ECJ, as the highest court in the EU, has a significant role. The previous case was decided by the General Court. The European Court of Justice, however, is one instance even higher. And, apart from normal court rulings, it can serve one special purpose too, among others, and that is issuing opinions. The principal organs of the EU are able to request an opinion on a legal matter from the ECJ, and that is exactly what the Commission did. However, it hoped for a somewhat different outcome. The ECJ ruled that the Commission, contrary to what it assumed, does not have the sole authority to conduct free trade agreements, as some policies fall within the member state's sole responsibility. The issue at hand was that a free trade agreement with Singapore was negotiated between Singapore and the EU, wherein the Commission took the lead as usual, as trade policy is its sole domain. Some parts of the agreement, however, touch upon the sovereignty rights of member states. The Commission inquired with the European Court of Justice for an opinion on the kind of free trade agreement that the EU Commission in general conducts, the so-called new generation of agreements, also bilateral free trade agreements, in order to be on the safe side.
Let me guess. It turned out to be unsafe.
Well, only free trade agreements that fall in the exclusive authority of the EU are the ones that can be conducted by the Commission, such as in goods and services, or transport, or intellectual property rights, etc. But investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms, as well as non-direct foreign investments, do not.
What?
Yes, that's right. Consequently, the Commission has to get member states' agreements as well, or let them even sign the free trade agreement themselves in the first place. Therefore, the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement cannot be concluded by the EU alone. That's a huge deal.
Right. And what was the third point you mentioned?
Well, those two decisions came as a blow, especially since the Commission has always pushed for a rapid negotiation schedule and for means of communications that would not necessarily include the general public. A bit has changed though under Cecilia Malmström, the EU Commissioner for Trade, as she pushed a bit towards the right direction. However, a Japan-EU free trade agreement has been negotiated since 2013 already and is apparently close to conclusion now. The two set positions by the court, though, might hinder that process. Not a lot is known about the agreement, not even what kind of investor-state settlement body they will employ. But surely, if one like in TTIP, it would need the member states' approval. What is more, in order to prevent another citizens' initiative and over 3 million unsatisfied signatories, maybe the EU Commission should start a public consultation mechanism rather sooner than later, in order to involve the public and to avoid yet another confrontation.
We see in many situations that the executive should listen or should have listened to its citizens. I mean, have you seen what happens in Hungary? Let me walk you through it.
Whoa, smooth transition, Guillaume. Does it so happen to be that the next piece is on Hungary?
No Sherlock.
Catchy tune. What is this?
Oh my god, will you show a little respect? Behave yourself, Orgilkos. This is the Hungarian national anthem. And Orgilkos means idiot in Hungarian. I googled it.
Right, chill. Why do you play the Hungarian anthem?
Because it's time to fly to Budapest. This is where it is all happening, mate. For the past few months, some massive protests have shaken the capital of Hungary. Many citizens of the country have taken the street to create the most important movement of protest since the power was handed in to Viktor Orbán in 2010.
Awesome. What happened?
It all began in March when the Hungarian Minister of Human Resources, Zoltán Balog, that is his name, launched a bill that, to sum things up, would have allowed the government to control private universities the way they control public ones. In other words, getting their hands on the funding processes, naming the rectors at the head of the institutions, and through them, having a wide control on all of the academic decisions. The bill was targeting one very university, the Central European University, or CEU, funded in 1991 by the Hungarian-American businessman George Soros.
A private foreign-founded university in Hungary? No way Orbán likes that.
You're dead right, mate. For the public authorities of Hungary, which is governed by a nationalist and populist administration, the CEU could not be more subversive. The classes are in English, and the academic content is not submitted to any of the government's approval. But if Viktor Orbán and his administration don't appreciate the institution, most Hungarian people want it to keep existing and to remain untouched. This is why, when the bill was introduced, a bill on which the CEU stated that it would, I quote, make it impossible for the university to continue its operations as an institution of higher education in Budapest, while some movements of protest have begun.
So the Hungarian citizens considered that the bill was an attack towards the CEU and through it towards their freedom of education.
Well, such were indeed the first layers of the protest. Before all, the people took to the streets their will to see the CEU remaining free and operational. Then, they chanted to protest the lack of freedom of education and of funds for public university. And finally, it was overall a massive shout against Viktor Orbán's sovereignist and nationalist positions and his skepticism towards the EU. Eventually, they got what they wanted, at least partially, since Orbán's agreed to negotiate with Andrew Cuomo, the governor of the state of New York, where the origins of the creation of the CEU took place. We wanted to find out more, so we got in touch with Daniel Deak, a professor at the Corvinus University of Budapest. Daniel was one of the organizers of the protest, and he is one of the greatest defenders of the freedom of education in the country. He is also revolted by the Hungarian government's despise of the European Union. got to talk to Daniel Deak through Skype, and the first thing we wanted to find out was how it all began, and what led the Hungarian people to the street. According to the lecturer, the problem started years ago and not just in March 2017.
So I think it is worth taking a look at a process of the recent 4 or 5 years. The radical changes started in 2012, because that was the year in which the new law on both public and higher education were adopted in Hungary, and this is really the start of a new period. As far as the universities are concerned, the first step was in 2012 to withdraw funds, to withdraw money. In the years of 2012, 13 and 14, that was dramatic for Hungarian universities because, roughly speaking, I think that in this period of 3 years, the Hungarian universities have lost half of their resources.
A lack of funds then, as we've explained, but not only.
Yes, unfortunately, it is not only a financial issue, but that was the first step to reduce all funds that are available. And then the new law is also, it constitutes a legal basis for further centralization. Probably the most important issue is, among many other problems, that the university autonomy has not simply been taken away, but even explicitly has been taken away. It is clear to recognize this process because already 2 or 3 years we have chancellors at public universities. Chancellors are appointed, nominated by the government, and the chancellor has the right of veto in practice against all of the academic decisions. We have a very formal system that the academic freedom must be interpreted in different layers, and allegedly professors and universities are free to determine the contents and methods of academic content, but they do not enjoy independence in organizational, financial, and financial matters.
What really struck us in Daniel's explanation is that, according to the professor, the point of all those bills, the vision of the public authority, is one of an uneducated country.
The future of Hungary is imagined by this government not as a knowledge-based society. Knowledge is not important. First, it is not important because it is not enough, not sufficient for processing and installation. Secondly, it is dangerous. Even it may be dangerous because we are living now in an autocratic system where also the political life is centralized very highly, which means that if you are able to think certain problems over, and if you are critical, that's a problem. So in such an atmosphere, in such a system, knowledge has been amortized, has been depreciated.
Beyond the fight for freedom of education, it is also Orbán's policy towards the European Union that was a target of the protesters. As Daniel explains it, there is a hatred against the EU that is maintained by the authority, but it does not reflect the citizens' will.
And it is also organized against the so-called Brussels authorities, although Brussels are we, of course. So it is ridiculous to make this artificial distinction between Brussels and non-Brussels, because we also have the same voice in the European Union. So this is already a big lying to divide the word between these two parts. So people are, the recent polls have shown us that the European Union is, despite this organized hatred, very popular in Hungary. It is about 70% of population that would vote for the EU. And of course, this situation can be changed, but since the time of the entry into the EU, that was 2004, this popularity has been preserved constantly, permanently.
According to Daniel, threatening the education in Hungary is threatening the EU in its deeper values. This is the reason the citizens started their protest, because protecting their education and protecting their position in the EU is in many ways interconnected.
Well, the message is that in Hungary, what you can find in the political system, it is a kind of populism, and it is dangerous. It is a threat for the values of democracy and the rule of law. And the problem of Hungary is not isolated. It can be infection, because also Poland, the Polish government, is conducting similar policy. And what is now a problem in Hungary or in Poland, it can also be a problem in other member states as well. So it is in the best interests of European people who are committed to the values of democracy, political democracy, and the rule of law, that they should stop this process. And at least they must not be silent in that issue. And a threat against European integration. It is a threat against solidarity, which is one of the fundamental values of the European Union. It is a pro-Europe message, for example, to entertain the idea of the exchange of information and the exchange of students, exchange of scholars, academics. It is also, for example, the Erasmus program that is in danger. If the Hungarian universities will not be able longer, for any reason, to join this project. So it is really a European project. In the matter of the Lex CEU, the Commission was able to start an infringement procedure because even if it is a university established by an American citizen, but it has been part of the European higher education system. It has been Hungarian, it has been European. They have many contacts with scholars coming from the European Union, with students coming from the European Union, even if there are, of course, the large number of professors are from North America, and the large number of students are from the former Soviet Union, but it has also been a European problem.
As we said, the Hungarian protesters managed to impose their will to the government, and the CEU will open its doors again after the summer holidays. A very important victory for those who dream of a country run by justice and by the values vehicled by the EU. Unlike many Hungarian citizens who enjoy their freedom of circulations and have decided to leave their country and to go find a more enjoyable life abroad, Daniel Deak has never considered leaving, despite the hardships.
I continue to live in Hungary. I cannot tell you, of course, what the future will bring us, but at the moment I'm here in Hungary. I'm loyal to my country, not to my government, but also to my government, of course, because I'm obliged to do that. So I'm loyal. I'm a loyal citizen, but I'm not without criticism, and I will not give up being critical if necessary, and as if it is dictated by my conscience. I like to contribute to a process of opening my country.
On behalf of all of us at Cheers in Esperanto, we want to wish to the Hungarian people that they manage to get the government they deserve. A government that follows the will of 70% of the citizens to remain in the EU. A government that respects the values of the EU in terms of freedom, justice and human rights. And a government that allows education to bloom and to create new generations of educated, free and happy Hungarian citizens. Daniel Deak's video interview is watchable on our website in its uncut version, www.cheersinesperanto.eu. And it's now time to switch topic. Paul is jumping next to me, his face reddened by anger. It's time to release the wrath of the beast in our upcoming statement, EU, get your together.
Knock knock.
Who's there?
Europe.
Europe who?
No, Europe who?
Oh my god, that was bloody terrible, Paul.
Was it? Sorry. Let's go again. Ring ring.
Oh, you're sneakily making a transition for the next topic, aren't you?
Maybe. Just answer the phone, dude.
Ring it again.
Okay. Ring ring.
Who's there?
Roamings.
Roaming's who?
Roaming's over.
Oh my god.
Well, I tried. Sorry. Yes, you guessed it. we are talking about roaming. We were all really glad when those news hit us on June 15th. The EU happily announced that roaming charges are now dropped. That's a great thing, because it actually shows many things, doesn't it? First, the EU actually does have an impact on our daily lives. Second, the EU governs in policies that are relevant, and not the tiresome tale of the cucumber and such. And third, that the EU is making it count when supranational coordination, meaning working together on cross-border issues, becomes relevant. That is amazing.
Sounds like a but is coming, Paul. Let me hear it.
Well, to tell it right away, it comes with a few shortfalls. And those we should clearly show and depict, because the Commission's happy smiles are hiding a few things and developments. Here it is, our coup de gueule, our regular piece on what flips us off when thinking about our dear loved EU. A segment that we like to call EU, get your together.
Because the EU does great things, but we're still allowed to criticise it, aren't we?
Exactly. And regarding our topic, roaming means that you are allowed to use your contract phone services to the same conditions as if you were at home. Meaning that, let's say, you're an Italian national and want to call your Maltese boyfriend. You will probably be charged extra. Now, when you're in Austria on vacation and call your boyfriend in Malta, it's as if you were calling from Italy, meaning not even higher prices just because you're now involving a third country, but rather still as if you're in Italy. So far so easy. Same counts for messages. So here are the nitty-gritty details. Dropping roaming charges applies to all calls and texts, but in general also internet, meaning data usage. But there are 5 conditions regarding data, and those might make it more costly.
Alright, let me do the cons on here. Number 5.
Data usage and its roaming costs are subject to the so-called fair use policy. That means that companies are allowed to charge you if you go over a certain amount of used data consumed abroad. The fair amount from the so-called fair use is the division of your data costs at home and your costs your provider has to pay to the roaming partner for the usage abroad. And all of that times 2. Let me give you an example. Meaning that if your contract foresees, let's say, a monthly 8 GB of usage for around 23 euros, that would allow you for 3 GB, which your phone provider has to double. Thus, times 2, as I said. So in this example, you will be charged extra once you exceed that usage of 6 GB. It's not a big difference, but calling it free roaming really is just a lie.
Okay. Number 4.
Many companies have had time to increase their contract costs since they had the regulation coming. As the discussions began quite a few years ago, companies could foresee the additional costs and will manage them so that roaming charges won't really affect them, which the consumer, us, obviously has now already paid for.
Bloody hell. Number 3.
There's no obligation to provide roaming to customers. Obviously that's a legal issue, but still, at least they either have to grant you roaming for all services, meaning texts, calls, data, or none at all. Just be advised, excluding only data from it while enabling texts, for example, is just not allowed.
Okay, number 2.
Providers are supposed to provide info and respond, but from our own experience already, we know that that is not really happening.
Yeah, you bet. And number 1.
No one could really tell us how many people are actually affected by that. The European Union advertises its engagement well and says it does so much for transport, communication and travel, but many people, especially those who cannot afford regular travels, vacation or studies abroad, won't even be profiting from that. More stable internet connections, broadband infrastructure, free Wi-Fi, those topics could have been a bit more pressing, don't you think, dear Commission?
Commission, EU, seriously, get your together.
This concludes the second episode of How to Say Cheers in Esperanto. Thank you so much for listening, you beautiful Europeans. We were delighted and proud to present this to you.
Keep in mind, gorgeous Europeans, that if you want to reach out to us with kind words or death threats, with questions or kinky suggestions, you can write us at info@cheersinesperanto.eu. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at Cheers in Esperanto and on Twitter at Cheers Esperanto. And as we've said before, to watch the anchored video interviews of the different people you've heard in the episodes, go to our website www.cheersinesperanto.eu.
We would like to thank from the bottom of our European hearts those who helped us bringing you this podcast. As usual, our mentee Lauren Clark and our groupies Yola Thürer and Christine Tiffert.
A special thanks for their technical help to Omar Reis, Anne-Laure Cabot, Thomas Ullmann and Antoine Sabardin. Thank you to Daniel Deak, to Liam Ó'Ruairc and to Jimmy Duclos, to Shoshana Martin, to Bogdan Stanchulescu and to Michael Leffler. And finally, thanks to the Galway Irish pub in Paris for allowing us to run a video interview in their premises and drink their beer. We're looking forward to hearing your feedback and to be back with the new episodes. And in the meanwhile, cheers in Esperanto!